Today we're making an Indian feast for under $20 that could easily feed two for an entire week of dinner meals. Fair warning, we are using some spices in this meal even though all the other ingredients are very budget friendly. Anything that might be a little bit more on the pricey side, we went ahead and made from scratch, which will reduce the price dramatically. I went ahead and got all of my ingredients from Walmart and then went and headed home and looked at what all I was cooking with. And here are all the ingredients I picked up from Walmart. I got some flour. I also have yeast on hand, but I'm going to be using 1 packet's worth. We're going to be using 2 of these potatoes, so I went ahead and subtracted the other potato from the budget. The basmati rice we are using, a half a gallon of whole milk. I got a whole head of garlic, 1 red onion, but you can use any color onion, a can of coconut milk, a can of green chilies, a large can of tomato sauce, a can of these fire roasted diced tomatoes, a can of chickpeas or garbanzo beans, 1 bag of spinach, 1 bag of peas, and 1 bag of cauliflower. And this brought our grand total to $19.75. Now for the things from my cupboard that we are using. I am using 1 teaspoon of that sugar, turmeric, cardamom, nutmeg, ground cinnamon, smoked paprika, garam masala, which that is something we will be making, the real lemon or lemon substitute, some bay leaves, vegetable oil, a little bit of margarine, some ginger, some chili powder, some cayenne pepper, some ground cumin, some cloves, salt and pepper, and a little bit of coriander. I know it's a lot of spices, but this is Indian food. I feel like it wouldn't be without all the spices. First up, we're making homemade paneer cheese. Now, a lot of Indian dishes have paneer in it, and you can use the white vinegar instead of the lemon juice if you need to in this recipe, but it's actually fairly easy to make on your own. You just add your milk into your pan, go ahead and bring it up to a simmer, and you're going to add in, once it's simmering, your lemon juice or your vinegar if that's what you're using, and go ahead and give it a good stir and let it sit for 10 minutes. Now it's going to start to curdle, and you're going to see these large chunks form, which would not normally be a good thing in milk, but in this case it's a very good thing. When I was looking up the price of paneer in my area, it was about $7 for what we are making today, so this is a pretty good deal to just be able to make it at home. After letting it sit for 10 minutes, you will have even larger chunks forming like this, and you're going to go ahead and strain it out. You can use a cheesecloth, or you can do what I did and just use a strainer if that's what you have on hand. Then you're going to press it using your spatula and try to get as much of that whey out as possible, as much of that liquid out, because you want the cheese to be as dry as possible so that you can really mold it and then cut it up later on when you're using it for your recipes. You're also going to want to go ahead and add in your salt at this point. This is something that you can taste, so you can take a little piece, taste it, see if it's as salty as you would like it, and add more, or even, well, I was gonna say or add less, but that's a little hard to do once you've added the salt. So I would say taste as you go and make sure that you don't overdo the salt on the front end, because it's harder to take away salt than it is to add it. Then you're going to go ahead and press it into, I've used a loaf pan, but you can use any kind of pan you like, or even just shape it into a square or rectangle shape, and then press it as firmly as possible into that dish and go ahead and refrigerate it and just let it to set. I let it refrigerate for a couple of hours. It ended up being 3 or 4 hours by the time I was ready to use it in these recipes. Next, we're going to be making this perfect jeera rice. For this, I am using basmati rice. You can, of course, use regular rice, and that will probably cut down on your cost a little bit, but I really like the texture that the basmati rice lends to Indian food, so I made sure and made room in the budget for it. We're using 3 of the cups of rice, so you're going to have about a cup left in your bag. If you were needing to feed more people, or you felt like you wanted more rice throughout the week, then you could, of course, just go ahead and make that extra cup and have 4 cups of rice. As you saw, I rinsed my rice until it was clear, and then I let it soak for about 30 minutes with just some water on top. Then I drained it off and started adding in my spices. I added in my marjoram here, my bay leaves, my cloves, my cumin, and a little bit of green chili as well. This rice is so fragrant as it's cooking and it tastes absolutely delicious. I can attest because I've already had it 2 or 3 times. And you will notice for several of these recipes, I'm not giving exact measurements as I'm giving verbal instructions, because I want to make sure the creators of the recipe get the traffic on their website. So if you want to make any of these recipes, please click the links in the description box and try them out. Leave them comments and feedback on their recipes, because they really did an excellent job at creating all of these recipes. Now I'm just adding in my water, and then I let it cook. I let it boil all the way, and then I put it down on low so that it could really steam through. And you can see it's really nice and fluffy, and as it cools down, it gets even fluffier. Now, as promised, we're making this easy garam masala, which does use a lot of spices, but it cuts down on how many spices you have to add to each dish afterwards. For this, we're using cumin, coriander, cardamom, pepper, ground cinnamon, cloves, and some nutmeg. And to store it, I just had an empty spice bottle that I went ahead and took some duct tape, put on the outside, and wrote on it to make a little label for it. And now I have my own garam masala, which the reason why I decided to make this myself is because A, I didn't have some on hand. I find it's one of those spices that you really have to go out of your way to find, at least where I'm at. So, and when I went to look for it, it was $6. So I went ahead and just used spices I have on hand to go ahead and make the spice. I used a funnel just to put it all into the bottle, and this made a little under half of a bottle of garam masala in the end. And we use this in a lot of our recipes, and I found it cut down on some of those spices that you had to add because this is already pre-mixed. I also will say that this is a very fragrant spice and isn't very spicy, so if you're not a heat fan, then it's still good. Now we're making some homemade naan, which is probably one of my favorite things that you would traditionally get at an Indian restaurant. For this, we're going to go ahead and put in that teaspoon of sugar that I told you we would use. A little bit of warm water. You want to err on the side of cooler versus hotter, because if you have the water too hot, it will go ahead and kill off your yeast, and you definitely don't want that to happen. Then I went ahead and mixed in my yeast, and you're going to go ahead and see that foam I was showing you on top, which means the yeast is working and alive. Now we're adding in our tablespoon of oil, a little bit of salt. The recipe called for yogurt, which is not something that I had in the budget here, so I am using my own substitute, which is a little bit of milk and a little bit of lemon juice that can substitute for sour cream, and it can also substitute for yogurt in a pinch. Then I added in my flour and mixed it all really well together. So for the yogurt substitute, I used a half of a cup of the milk, and I added in about a teaspoon of the lemon juice for a specific amount in case you're also substituting your yogurt for milk instead. Now here's the dough we have. It's nice and elastic. I went ahead and set it aside and let it double in size, and then I kind of punched it down and kneaded it just a little bit in order to get some of the large air bubbles out, and then I set it aside and I let it rise a second time. I have found with these breads that it's best if you do have the time to let it rise all the way, otherwise you will get kind of a hard chewy dough instead of the light fluffy pull apart dough like a naan would normally be. As you see, it doubled in size, so I just started pinching off balls that were about 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and then I went ahead and stretched them out into thin pieces. I just did it by hand. You could use a rolling pin, but I found by hand was just as easy, and less dishes is always a plus. And then I put it into my heated up pan, and I tried it 2 different ways. I tried it just without the lid on, and then I tried it with the lid on. I didn't notice a huge difference, but I did end up using the lid just because I felt like it cooked faster, and we were all getting hungry, so the faster it could be done, the better for this dish. You'll want to flip each naan as you see brown spots start to come up, and you'll see that one side has more bubbles than the other. The first side you put down tends to have a more even grill, and the other side tends to have these big air bubbles that form, and then you can just add some butter on top, and if you have cilantro you can add some of that, or you could add a little bit of garlic powder if you would like and have like a garlic naan. I just kept it with some butter and a little bit of cilantro. Now we're making some easy jeera aloo, which if I butcher any of the names, please forgive me. I am not native to India, although I do enjoy the food and the people and the culture. I went ahead and took one potato and, as you saw, kind of cut it up, cubed it, peeled it, boiled it, not in that order, and then I added some oil on the side, and I'm just adding my spices into the side of the dish just so they can saute a little bit and become more fragrant. I added ground cumin, a little bit of turmeric, some of those green chili peppers, some red chili powder, which I know some of these spices are not the exact Indian spices that you might be supposed to be using in these recipes, but I'm using what I have on hand and what is the closest approximation to what would be in these recipes. So I added in my lemon juice, and then I went ahead and just stirred everything all together and let that sauce thicken up and evaporate just a little bit, and added a little extra salt at the end just because it needed some salt. And here we have our finished dish. Now we're making this Indian style creamed spinach, which is so delicious. Use coconut milk as the start for the sauce. Then you're going to go ahead and add in your frozen spinach. You can of course use drained canned spinach as well. It just won't be quite as vibrant in color, which is fine. Next, we're going to go ahead and add in our diced onions and a little bit of ground ginger. You can use fresh ginger as well if that's what you have on hand. In fact, I think that's what the recipe calls for, and I just didn't have ground ginger or fresh ginger on hand. Then I added in a little bit of oil, some of our Garam Masala, and then a little bit of turmeric as well. I love the color that turmeric lends to food. It makes it really vibrant and yellow or orange, and it's actually supposed to be really healthy for you. I also added in cayenne pepper. Now the cayenne pepper is what is giving this dish any sort of spice, so if you're not a spice person, you can leave it out together, or you can just add a very little amount. Added in my fire roasted diced tomatoes, a little bit of water, some salt, and after I stirred, I went ahead and added some more salt as needed. Then I stirred everything together, and you can see it all kind of melts together and it becomes this really flavorful spinach dish. I really love how many vegetables and bright, vibrant colors we have in all of these dishes. They definitely all make a very pretty plate. And now our creamed spinach is finished. Next, we're making this easy cauliflower and chickpea masala, which has a lot of protein and veggies packed in it. We're using our garam masala as a base for our spices. Now, as I was making these meals, I had a question or two questions for you all. One was, what is your favorite cuisine to eat from? And the other one was, what is your preferred heat level? Like, do you like spicy food or not really spicy? Comment below and let me know, because I like to try to make recipes that people who are watching the videos would like to make. So if you're not into spicy food or you don't really care for Indian cuisine quite as much, then I will try to steer away from it in the future and make some different kinds of videos that might be more your preference. Now I'm adding in my diced onions as well as my diced garlic, which I love fresh garlic, it's so good. Some ground ginger, just a little bit of oil to help those spices to combine and to saute well. Then I'm going to add in my heaping cup of cauliflower, which is still frozen, which is why it doesn't really squish down to a cup shape. as well as the fact that they are large pieces of cauliflower. Adding in my chickpeas, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in my tomato sauce, which proceeded to go everywhere, but that's okay, that's part of cooking. Then I added in a little bit of water just to thin things out just a little bit. Used my kitchen shears, of course, to cut up that cauliflower so that it was a little bit more of a bite-sized piece. Added in a little bit of milk, which you could also instead use coconut milk if the dairy gives you more issues. And our dish is done. Next up, we're making Indian Aloo Gobi. This is a spiced potato and cauliflower and onion dish. I went ahead and prepared the potato just like I did in our previous recipe, where I just boiled the cube potatoes till they were fork tender and then drained them off. I added in my cauliflower, a little bit of oil just so that things don't stick on the bottom. Then I sliced up my onions and added those in, and added in a little bit of water after that had cooked just a bit. Added in some salt as well, just to make sure everything is starting to get really seasoned, and added in coriander. Which, fun fact, coriander is just the seeds of cilantro, which I found out when I grew some and they bolted in my garden. Next, I added in a little bit of ground cumin and some of our Garam Masala. You're also going to want to add in some ground ginger and a little bit of that turmeric again to give it that nice color and flavor. Then you're going to mix everything together. Oh, and can't forget the cayenne pepper. The cayenne pepper is just going to add that peppery taste to it, a little bit of spice, and a little bit of lemon juice to add some zest. Then I went ahead and mixed everything together. It's going to turn bright orange or bright yellow, whichever your color wheel tells you it is. And then I went ahead and chopped up that cauliflower just a little bit smaller, just so it was more bite size, about the same size as those potatoes. I stirred everything together, added a little more salt as needed. You can always taste all of these dishes because since they are vegetarian, you don't have to worry about raw meat. Now we are making some Matar Paneer, which we are going to be using our paneer cheese for the first time with, and I learned some things through this recipe which helped my next recipe improve greatly. I started out by adding in my spices as well as my chopped up onion and a little bit of that minced garlic, some more of those green chilies, my fire roasted diced tomatoes, which of course you can just use regular diced tomatoes as well if that's what you got on hand, some tomato sauce. And next you're going to want to take out that paneer cheese and go ahead and slice up half of it into little cubes and add that in. Now, if you want your paneer to stay more into pieces instead of disintegrating, you are going to want to get a separate pan, put a little bit of oil in it, and just pan fry it for a few seconds so it gets golden brown on several of the sides, because that is what's going to hold your cheese together. When I put it into this dish, it did disintegrate, which is fine. It tastes fine. It just looks a little bit different than I thought it was going to. But if you are wanting it to stay more in the shape of the cheese cubes instead of turning into more of like a ricotta type of thing that you are mixing into your dish, then you're going to want to pan fry it separately and then fold it in. Now you will see I do that technique in the next recipe. I did not know to do that in this recipe. I went ahead and added my frozen peas into the recipe and a little bit of turmeric, as well as some chili powder, as well as some coriander, salt, and garam masala. Now, several of these recipes in the instructions say to puree or to blend the sauce before adding other things in. That is probably going to be really delicious, but I am lazy and sometimes I want everything to just be in one pan. So that's what I did for this dish. Now, of course, you can go ahead and blend it off into separate dishes and then add them all in, but this is what I did here. So choose which way you would like to do it, depending on the recipe. I also added in a little bit of coconut milk. It calls for actual milk, which we did have on hand, but I wanted to try it with the coconut milk, and it turned out quite good. So here's our finished dish. Now we're making this paneer tikka masala, which is the recipe that I did the paneer the right way, or at least the way that it holds together better and looks nicer. So I went ahead and added in a little bit of oil and sauteed my garlic in it, and then you can see I'm adding cubes of paneer in here, and it is holding together much nicer as it pan fries. You're gonna see one side of them get browned, and then the other side's gonna get browned as well, and this is just gonna hold it together because it's gonna be kind of have like a crust on all the sides of the cheese. I then added in all of my peas. It was a little bit over a cup, but I didn't feel like reserving a little bit of peas for any other recipe because our other recipe did not call for it. I went ahead and added in my spices as well, my ground cumin, coriander, garam masala, and a little bit of salt as well. I then added in a little bit of coconut milk, and later saw that this is one of those recipes with a separate sauce which calls for even more coconut milk, so you'll see me put in 1/4 of a cup of coconut milk, which was supposed to be part of the sauce. Now I'm also going to add in the rest of the ingredients for the sauce, which included a little bit of lemon juice. I am substituting a cup of frozen spinach instead of sliced green or sliced red peppers is what it called for. So I am substituting that one. I went ahead and added in a little bit of ginger and some of those chopped up onions, which I love purple onions in that color. I went ahead and added in the minced garlic, a little bit more salt, some pepper as well, which I will say none of these dishes are like very crazy spicy, so if you're not a spice or heat person, then these are still going to be really good recipes for you. And if you are wanting to cut down on heat in any of the recipes, just omit the cayenne pepper. You can see the paneer cheese stayed together in this one. I mixed it all together after adding that tomato sauce, and our dish is ready. Now to make some chickpea coconut masala, which this is my own concoction. This is me using up all the remaining ingredients basically. I used 1/4 of a cup of the green chilies, a cup of the chickpeas, 1 cup of the cauliflower, 1 heaping cup of the frozen spinach, another heaping cup of the frozen spinach, so 2 cups was what it ended up being. About 3/4 of a cup of diced tomatoes, a teaspoon of the minced garlic, and then I just kind of mixed it together a little bit before adding more ingredients in. I added in some garam masala. I decided to just see how it would be if this was the major spice that I put into the dish instead of adding all those separate spices one by one, just because I wanted to see if it could stand alone. I added in the remainder of my coconut milk, which was about 1/2 of a cup, and a little bit of that cayenne pepper just to add some heat in because I do enjoy a little bit of heat, and some salt just to help flavor it. I believe I added more salt later on as needed, which all of these dishes of course taste and see if it needs more salt or more pepper or any other of the spices. Tweak them as desired because these dishes taste even better when they are tweaked to your personal taste. Now this is all that we had left. We had a little bit of milk, 1 cup of rice, about 2 or 3 cups of the all-purpose flour was left, and 1/2 of a head of garlic, and that was it. So we actually did a really good job at using all our dishes, and here is our completed feast, which this is going to feed us for a while. So we are going to have Indian food for probably a solid week here, and because it's just me and my husband. But if you were a larger family, say 4 or 5, then this would actually feed you all as well, just for fewer meals. You might feed you for about 2 of your meals. And of course, that rice, that ginormous pot of rice, could be even more rice if you were needing to feed more. But here's our completed meal. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. This is a fun adventure for me as well, and I hope to see you all in the next one.